In this class, we're going to look at C# methods. So let's begin with the introduction to methods. So what is a method? A method is a reusable set of instructions that perform a specific task. So developers use methods to make our code organized, maintainable, and repeatable. You might hear methods also called functions, but for now, for this class, the difference isn't important to us yet. Our learning objectives for this class is to recognize methods, call methods with multiple arguments, capture the returned values, and to define a basic method. So you've actually already been using methods. Examples are console writeLine, which prints something to the console. We've looked at mathmin, which finds the smallest or smaller of two given numbers. So each method you can see has a different behavior. So far you've been using built-in methods. So built-in methods are methods that are available whenever you use C#. We activate a method's behavior by calling it. So we do this by adding parentheses to the end of the method name. So it looks like this, console writeLine, and then the parentheses. And that calls that method. So some methods accept inputs called arguments. Console writeLine accepts one string argument, and that argument will be printed to the console. So for example here's the method, console writeLine, and here is the string, the argument. I love this class. So other methods accept multiple arguments like mathmin. It accepts two number inputs. So in this example, 3 and 5. So that's two arguments that it accepts. So there are built-in methods for each data type too. So every string has access to methods like index of. Okay, that's a built-in method. There's also substring. That's another built-in method. So like a math function or a factory machine, a method takes an input and it returns output. So we've seen how input works, right? In the form of arguments. So those arguments are inputs. So now let's go take a look at how outputs work. So when a method returns a value, it essentially passes a piece of data to wherever it was called. So one way to capture the returned value of a method is with a variable. So capture your output with a variable. So for example here's a variable, data type integer. The variable name is smaller number. And here's the method, mathmin. So whatever is the lesser of, that value is going to be captured in this variable. So mathmin returns the value 3. So imagine that value is taking its place here. There you go, 3. We can use that variable as an input to other methods like console writeLine. So console writeLine, and then print that smaller number, this variable. You can also take a shortcut. Okay, you don't have to write in so many lines. You can just go console writeLine and then the method, and inside of that method the two arguments. Now the value returned by mathmin is used as input to console writeLine. So you don't need that extra variable in there. So not every method though returns a value. For example, console writeLine prints 3 to the console, but it doesn't pass the value 3 to its caller. So sometimes you need a custom method for your specific program. You might need to define your own instead of using built-in methods. So how do we do that? Here's a basic structure of a method definition. Okay, so here we have your method definition, your declaration, and then here you have in your curly brackets what it's supposed to do. So you have static, but don't worry right now about what static is and what void is. Just remember to put these in. Later in the course we'll look at what static is and what void is. Okay, So don't worry about those two. Just take a look at here, your method name. So this is your method name, and then in parentheses. In C#, it's convention to use the PascalCase to name your method. So what does PascalCase look like? You make the first letter of each word hyphenated, like Pascal, and then C for case with no spaces, remember? And all together, okay? So the name starts with uppercase, and each word following begins with an uppercase with no spaces. So it's not required in C#, like your code will still work, but it makes it easier for your code to read for other developers, and also is convention. So if you want to look professional, you should use the convention. So the body of your method goes between these curly brackets. So whenever the method is called, it is the code in the body that's going to be executed right here. So when you call it, just like with any other method, you call it with parentheses. So your method name and then parentheses. So methods that you define can use arguments as well, which makes them more versatile and useful. Like in mathmin, you have 2 arguments here, right? So what is a parameter? While we're defining our method, we don't know the actual argument values that are going to be used when calling the method, right? But we do know that there's expected data type and how it's going to be used. So you use this information to define a parameter, which works like a variable within a method. So imagine it as a placeholder for the actual argument value. So defining a parameter. So here you have static void, your method name, and then in the parentheses is where you put your parameter, string for the data type, and then identity, that's your parameter name. So that your method name method has now one parameter named identity, and the data type is string. So if you have multiple parameters, you can separate them with commas. Okay, so you have 2 here, identity, which is a string data type, and then you have age, which is integer data type. And then here you can, the code to execute can be something like console write lines, identity, which is a string is, age, years old. So when you want to call your method with parameters, the values for each parameter is going to be called arguments. So now you're calling it, right? So this is the arguments Yoda and 900. Okay, so Yoda for the identity and 900 for the age. All right now I'd like you to pause the video and do class activity 1. And then when you're done with class activity 1 and you have submitted it, you can come back to the PowerPoint video here and continue watching. So now let's continue on with talking about how parameters can only be used within the method. Okay, so remember, parameters can only be used inside of the method. So right now we have defined the parameter here, message, and then you can, print that message in this code block to execute. And this is, referred to only within the method, and the method is here. Okay, the method is from here, this and this. So that is your method. Okay, so you can call message. Okay, and that message is a parameter. Okay, that was defined in this method, but you cannot call it outside. See this console write line? This is outside of this method here. Okay, so you cannot call message here. It causes an error. So you'll see an error like the name message does not exist in the current context. So a parameter scope is within its method, which means that the name, the message in this case, is only valid inside of the method, within its method. So if the parameter name is used outside of the method, it has no meaning, so it throws an error. Okay, so we'll talk more about scope in future lessons, but this is what you need to know right now. So let's also talk about optional parameters. To make our functions even more flexible, we can make certain parameters optional. So if someone calls your method without all the parameters, the method will then assign a default value for those to those missing parameters. So you can use the equal sign when defining the method. Okay, so in this example, the punctuation is an optional parameter and its default value is here, period. Okay, default value is period. So let's take a look at it. So this is, here we go, your method name. Okay, so this is your method. And you have the parameter message and you have the parameter punctuation, and both of them are strings. Okay, but for punctuation, you have a default value that you defined here. Okay, there we go. So you have a default value. And anyways, the code that's going to be executed is going to print message and punctuation. Okay, so when you call it, I'm hungry, as the message and then an exclamation mark, it's going to print I'm hungry with the exclamation mark. But if you call it only writing I'm hungry, then it's going to print I'm hungry with the default punctuation, which is the period. So when your method has lots of optional parameters, but you only want to specify one when you call it, in this example, let's say your method has 5 optional parameters like A, B, C, D, and E. Okay. So here you have the default A is 0, B is 0, C is 0, D is 0, E is 0. Okay. But when you call the method, you only want to specify D. Okay. But calling the method like below here, for would set to a 4, not D, right? So you have to refer to your parameter by its name instead. Okay, so if you want to specify D, to be 4, then you have to say D colon 4. Okay, that's the right way to specify that one parameter. You can list named arguments in any order, actually. Okay, so if your name D is 4, B is 1, A is 2, you don't have to put them in order like A, B, C, and then D. Okay, you can list them in any order, really. You can mix named and positional arguments. Okay, so here's a mixture here. This one is named and this is positional. Okay, which means A is going to be 2, B is going to be 1, and D is 4. But do remember that positional arguments must come before named arguments. So that's why we have it here, positional. Okay, A and B before named. So you cannot name it like this, D and then 2 and 4. So that would also call an error. So named arguments aren't always necessary. You don't have to use named arguments, but when are they useful is that when a method has many optional parameters and when you want to differentiate between similar arguments. All right, so now you're ready to do class activity 2. So please pause this video, complete your activity 2, and then come back to the video, please. Now, moving on, let's talk about method overloading. So let's take a look at Math Round first. Math Round. This is a built-in method. It has at least 8 different versions. Okay, so you can go to Microsoft documentation, that link I've given you before, and take a look at Math Round. They all have the same name, Math Round. This is called method overloading. Okay, and each version of it is called an overload. So while they all have the same name, the overloads are different because, why are they different? Because they have different parameter types and also different number of parameters. So this is useful if you want to have the same method for different behavior based on its inputs. So for example, you have Math Round where you have two arguments here, double and integer here. So this rounds the double to the integer's number of decimal points. So if you have 3.14159 and 2, it's going to round it to 2 decimal points, 3.14. If you just put one argument in there, like if you just put 3.14 in there, it would just return 2. It will round to the nearest integer. So in C#, when we say that methods are different, what we're really talking about is the method signatures, okay, which is the method's name and the parameter types in order. All right, now I think you're ready to do activity 3. So after you've done activity 3, please come back to this video.